Awesome.
Okay.
Jose, thanks for having me here in Miami for the very first on location shoot of the Mind Your Business podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast, Bob. It's a privilege to be here.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. You and I had a chance to have a dinner several weeks ago. Was it the Bitcoin conference? Maybe I can't remember actually even what the
I think it
event
was
was.
like 2 months ago.
2 months ago. Yeah.
So,
And
yeah,
and we had what I found to be just a enlightening conversation, and so I've looked forward to continuing that, and hopefully the people out there listening and watching will find some nuggets of wisdom or insight from what we have. Um, when I talk to people and kind of bring them in to the podcast, I always like to start at the beginning, and so just to kind of help everybody get to know Jose a little bit, tell me, where did you grow up? What was your family like? Let's start there.
absolutely. Well, I grew up in Guatemala, born and bred Guatemalan. Dad from Guatemala originally, but his family on his mother's side is from Switzerland. My mom, was born in the U.S., so she's from here. But I pretty much lived most of my life in Guatemala. We did come to the U.S. a lot. Uh, Grew up, kind of going to the American school, speaking English as well. Pretty much had the U.S. curriculum
Yeah.
for social studies and everything.
So bilingual from almost birth.
Yeah, pretty much. And then, just stayed in Guatemala till I went to college in Monterrey, Mexico. I went back to Guatemala for a short period of time, then went back to the US or came to the US for the first time, set up a coffee roasting company, and then went back to Guatemala when my dad died. This was like 12, 13 years ago now, and now just found out about Bitcoin in 2012 and kind of
Before we dive too
brings
deep
it brings
there,
us up to speed.
before we dive too deep there, I saw a question, a little bit about your youth. So I'm curious, like when you were in uh, high school,
Yeah.
would people have said, "Hey, Jose is the nerd, he's the athlete, he's the musician, he's the," what would they have? How would they have categorized you, your classmates?
I don't know, honestly, because I've been kind of all of that. What
Yeah.
you just said, I never like fit into like one particular group.
Hmm.
There is something about my high school years that I think is very unique to me because I was growing up during you know uh, late '80s, early '90s. That's when I went to uh, high school, and I did not have a phone.
Oh.
So all throughout high school, I didn't have a phone. So I didn't have, you know, my school, like when I saw my schoolmates was during school, and that's it. And I
Hmm.
didn't have any, interaction with them outside of school.
I see.
And so it was, I guess, kind of weird because I was always just going off on my own direction, and I loved sports, but I also loved video games, and I loved reading, and I loved, you know, very diverse interests, I guess. And so I never fell into like a clique or anything. So I don't know
Yeah.
what they think of me, honestly.
Ah, that's very curious. I think obviously we're going to talk a lot about Bitcoin,
Yeah.
but I always like to know kind of the essence of the person and where they came from. And I think that there are some common elements that I've found in kind of my journeys, and this is one of the independent person. And it
Yeah.
obviously is logical, right?
Yeah.
That a person who was independent and probably comfortable with themselves, comfortable with not being the person that fit into the crowd, um, is okay. And it doesn't mean that you were necessarily ostracized.
No,
You
not
know,
at
because
all.
I would actually probably categorize myself similarly, that um, I was good in mathematics and I was very good in school. I think with kind of the very studious kind of people, I fit in. I was an athlete. I played at several team sports, but I often found that I was never part of any one group. So I think a lot of the other kids were always with the heavy metal rockers, or they were with the other people in band
Mhm.
or the drama people, or and I would kind of float
Yeah,
between those groups.
yeah,
And
me as well. Absolutely. It's weird because you're not ostracized, right? Because
yeah,
you kind of get along with everybody.
yeah,
You know, nobody really gives you a hard time, but then you're not really like super tight with anybody, and you just
yeah, yeah,
are kind of like a bee that's moving from
right,
place to place.
yeah. It's interesting, not to dwell too much on our childhoods, but I like when I was in high school,
Mhm.
every once in a while I would have these moments where I'd feel a little left out because I wasn't part of any one group.
Mhm.
Like if there was a party or a get together, I probably wasn't the first person somebody thought of, like
Oh,
Bob should be there. Now, if I had shown up,
mhm.
nobody would have. I
Yeah,
would not. It would not have been an issue.
exactly.
But I wasn't like probably the core. I had one or two close friends. That was really it, and they were probably similar to me in
Mhm.
that they weren't part of a group, but we weren't part of this bigger thing. But like I said, I think Bitcoiners have to be comfortable that way, right? Because we go out into the world in the same way, and often we're in a group that won't align with us right off the bat, at least.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think Bitcoiners, for the most part, at least, let's say when I got into Bitcoin, which was like 2012, and then up to like maybe fairly recently, like 2018, 2019, it was very much, let's say, independent thinkers, right? Very much people that are kind of searching for stuff on their own,
Yeah.
and are another thing that I found out, it's self-taught. You know,
Oh, that's very insightful. I would agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of self-taught people, and and people that are just searching for a solution, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but at the same time, not afraid to be wrong, right? I guess, or perceived as wrong, I guess, so you kind of get back to that one thing. If I think comfortable in your own skin, that
Yeah, you have to have that level of comfort of going against the grain of, you know, and having that degree of certainty, maybe not certainty, but kind of like, even if I'm wrong, I don't think I am, and I'd rather listen to myself than to the crowd, right?
yes, yes, yeah, key element. Now,
Yeah.
I think as time goes by, that will change.
It's
You
already
know,
changing, I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
right?
maybe you're right. Maybe we're right almost in that inflection point now, the last
Yeah.
year or so.
Yeah, I think it's starting to change because, at the start, at least not the guys that, got into Bitcoin because they wanted to buy drugs, let's say, and then suddenly the price goes up and they fall in love with it because they love the
Yeah, yeah,
price appreciation. But now the guys that were in it from more like a philosophical standpoint, that really had to dig deep into why Bitcoin is worth it, right? I think right now we're starting to kind of, especially with even the lightning layer, which is what we're involved in at IBEX, is it's start to see people that don't necessarily need to understand Bitcoin for themselves. They kind of, you know, there are people of trust or experts that they refer to.
hmm
And they say, well, if this guy is right. This guy I trust and I believe in is right. I'll go along for the ride. And that's something that didn't happen in the early days, right?
Yeah.
You had to find that reason to go with it on your own.
Yep. Yep. It's probably, one step removed from the independent thinker, because these people still are going against the grain.
Yeah.
But they need just that boost of confidence from somebody they trust, or believe in. So I think we're kind of in that range. Yeah.
We're
today.
starting to get there. And so, now I see, like at the start, even if I didn't agree 100% with a lot of people that were in Bitcoin, on why they thought Bitcoin was valuable, because there's always been a little bit of, what is this and that type of stuff. But so even if I didn't understand it 100% or didn't, go with them 100% throughout their whole thought process, they had to have that thought process from the start, right?
Yeah.
And now it's more like you see a lot of more references to, this person, this expert, I heard this from X, and you didn't have to go through the pain
Yes.
of kind of figuring out for yourself, right?
Yeah. And those of us, I'll skip forward a little. I don't want to completely leave your childhood yet, but what era did you enter the Bitcoin world?
2012.
2012. Oh, very early. Okay, so you truly had to seek this.
Well, I think Bitcoin more found me than I found Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So it was super weird. I was going through these, Google rabbit holes I get into sometimes where you're just searching for stuff, or somehow it popped up in a random search, the white paper.
Yes.
And so, like Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer decentralized, cash, everything, Satoshi white paper. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. And I clicked on it and read the white paper, and I immediately got the value proposition. I'd like to say that. I didn't understand it 100%, like all of the intricacies, but the value proposition was there to me from the start.
Yeah.
My main concern was the ability of Bitcoin to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was always like, if people really get this early enough, or at least, let's say, central bankers really get this, they might not let it continue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's fascinating you found it that way, because it mirrors what you just told me about your childhood, that you were kind of go home and by yourself and you found it. And, but I would say very few people would have that method by which they found it. They usually found it through somebody else who said, have you heard about, or let me tell you about. That's almost always the case. I think you might be the first person I've talked to that said, I found it because I was wandering about by myself, but it fits what you just told me about yourself and your personality. And I'd say that, by the way, that's a wonderful way to find it, because a little story about my first exposure to it, and a lot of people have this story. I was running a computer refurbishment company at the time, and we had thousands of computers in our warehouse that we were trying to sell. We would refurbish them and then we'd get them ready to sell. And one day, I can't say the exact date, but it was probably 2012, 2013, one of the employees came in. And wonderful man, very smart, but let's say, just say an alternative thinker to an extreme.
Okay.
Okay. And wonderful man. But, he came to me, and kind of my right-hand guy, still at Barefoot Mining, Keith Thomas, who's the president of the company. And he said, hey, guys, have you heard about Bitcoin? He said, we should be mining Bitcoin. We should take all these computers that are just sitting on the shelves doing nothing, waiting to be sold, and we should mine Bitcoin with them. And then, well, what is Bitcoin? And I said, God bless this guy. I don't want to name him, but God bless this guy. But he didn't have a very good way of explaining what Bitcoin was, And so I did do some cursory research. I didn't get it the right way, and I feel like maybe I was tainted a little bit. Massive fault of my own, by the way, massive fault of my own, that I think I discounted it a little bit because of the way I was first introduced to it. It came off a little wild, crazy, crackpotty sort of thing, and it was wrong. I didn't take it serious enough, but I could have been a miner of massive proportions in 2012, 2013.
2012, you could mine with
I'd own Miami right now instead of but
you could mine with a laptop. It was like,
and we literally had thousands of these computers, and we already owned them. All we had to do was turn them on. That's all we had to do was turn them on. And Keith and I did the nerdy thing, which was, we didn't understand what Bitcoin was, so we just looked at it from a classic fiat perspective. Well, if we turn these on, how much power do they consume? What's the power rate? It doesn't look like we'd make that much. And could we actually get people to buy the Bitcoin to convert it to fiat? And so, I think you're one of the few people who maybe got Bitcoin right away, and I think my cursory observation would be, maybe the way you got it was because of the type of person you are and the way that you found it.
I think more because of kind of where I was at that point in time, and also, I think life experiences kind of, shape the necessity, right?
Yeah.
So I fully understand to this day, if you're living in Europe or you're living in the US, like, why do you need Bitcoin, right? Like, especially if you're from the US, like, the dollar is king.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you're from Guatemala and there's more than one currency, and that currencies can really lose their value, as happened in the 80s in Guatemala, which I went through. And it didn't happen to me firsthand, but it happened to my parents. It happened to friends of theirs, where you lose life savings.
Sure.
If your currency gets devalued by, let's say, 8 times, as happened during the 80s in Guatemala, so you suddenly have 1/8 your purchasing power of your savings.
It's catastrophic.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that I've actually been on the wrong end of a bank bankruptcy.
Oh, interesting.
So I understand that.
In Guatemala as well?
Yeah, in Guatemala as well. And so I understand that, the money in the bank is the bank's money, which I think a lot of people don't really realize, because you're so used to banks being these foolproof institutions and super safe. Where I come from, it's not so safe, not so foolproof, and you still use them because of the convenience factor, right? And now, not only the convenience, but the criminalization of cash. But I had gone through 2 experiences that really left a mark on me. I kind of, if you tell me, when I first read Bitcoin, and I read, you couldn't print it, you couldn't confiscate it, and you could hold whatever amount you needed personally. Like, that's good enough for me. Like, price appreciation is kind of like a plus. I don't need that to actually want it. Right? Like, as long as, I can keep it, that's good.
Yeah. Well, I think I was fortunate. While I didn't live firsthand like you lived, through my wife, who's from the Philippines, I got to learn what it meant to grow up in a third world country, what it, to not have faith in the banks, to know that, like in her case, she lived the first 16 years of her life under martial law. And, when you start personalizing and internalizing those sort of things, then a lot makes sense. And I often do that when I'm speaking at a seminar or a place where, especially there's newer people in the audience. That's one of the, especially here in the US, that's one of the first things I'll do is say, I hope what you can do is look at Bitcoin through the optics of people in second and third world countries, because you're going to have a really hard time in Naples, Florida, or Miami, Florida, or Austin, Texas, getting this.
Yeah.
Like, especially if you're in a privileged position like that, you don't wake up every morning wondering if the bank is going to be open that day, right? And whether or not they'll let you withdraw your money. Like, those are real things.
Well, even to this day, right, in Guatemala, there's a cap, like a daily cap on how much money you can withdraw in cash.
Yeah.
And it's not that high.
Yeah.
It's really not that high.
Yeah.
It's like, they won't give you more than around $2,000, the equivalent of in cash. And anything more than that, they'll just say no.
Wow. And how about dollar? Because usually,
it's even worse.
Even worse. A few $100 or something like that, maybe.
Like, they limit not just the withdrawal, but the deposit of dollars.
Oh, interesting. They limit
you cannot deposit more than $1,000.
Oh, really?
If they're cash, don't forget about it.
Huh. I've never heard that before. So I'm learning stuff here today. I'm very familiar with the withdrawal part, because I understand. We're going to talk about Lebanon a little later, some foreshadowing, but I understand the withdrawals because basically a dollar-based accounts in these countries really become under the control of the central banks of those countries, and they provide liquidity in the international marketplace for the whole country. So they're not going to let very much out at any one point in time, especially if the country is under any economic stress. But what would be the philosophy behind a deposit limit? What do you think?
To curtail money laundering, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So, because we're in that drug corridor, I guess you call it.
I see.
Yeah, they want to keep it.
I see.
Yeah, they limit it because of money laundering, I believe.
I see. Very interesting. Very interesting. It's another one of those things where I think the cure might be worse than the disease, interestingly. But
well, absolutely. So I'm going to go off here on a tangent.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
This is something that really worries me, right? So I'm just going to throw out the premise, right? And we assume I'm correct, and then I'll build upon it, and with the understanding that if the premise fails, everything I'm about to say fails, right?
Yeah.
So one is that money is the ultimate peace agent tool. That's without money, we can't have peace. That's about as clear cut as it gets for me. Right?
Would you say sound money?
Well, I don't make a distinction. To me, money, is this tool, right? As a tool, it has properties, like a knife.
Okay.
So it's like if we're discussing knives, and you tell me a sound knife, well, yeah, and a dull knife makes no sense, right? It's
okay. All right.
Right? Like,
all right.
Do you need a sharp knife?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want the knife to is it even a knife if it's not sharp, right?
Okay.
And by the same measure, if it's even money, if it doesn't do what money's supposed to do, right? So
then it shouldn't be called money. I like that. That's very good.
So money has certain set of characteristics, right? Like it's fungible, it's divisible, it's durable,
Yeah. Right.
you can go down the list, and everybody knows it. So or most people know it, but if not,
Yeah.
Google properties of money.
Yeah.
Somebody who will explain it a lot better than me. But if it doesn't meet with those characteristics, right? Is it even money? Now you can say you have better quality money, like you have a sharper knife, right? But if it's a dual knife, or if it's a rubber knife, is it a knife? Does it cut?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I need it to cut, right?
Yes.
And so by stripping back those properties of money, so money's under attack as I see it. You have it, and it's corrupting these properties, right? So it's like, listen, we'll give you this knife, but having it made of metal is too dangerous, so we'll make it out of wood.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the world we live in today, where the thing we call money often isn't, right? The currency we use or is
exactly. And money's getting attacked, and it's getting its properties stripped away. And so this ultimate agent of peace is no longer able to perform its function. And so you see peacefulness eroding globally, really, right? And so one of the things that is eroding peace is these AML KYC laws that, while I understand, their intentions might be the best, the road to hell is paved with
good intentions,
right?
Yes.
And what they're fundamentally doing is they're stripping away core properties of money. So, okay, now money is not as fungible, right? So in the example of Guatemala, right? Cash money is different from banking money or banked money, right?
Yep.
It's not the same thing. And so you have two levels of money. You have cash money and you have banked money. And even though it's supposed to be the same, it's not. Right? And then even within banked money, with all the KYC AML, okay, but where does it come from? And tell me how you got this, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it case may be. Like prove that the money you are trying to deposit or wire or do anything with came to you through a legitimate source.
Yeah.
And then how do you do that? And it starts to get really complicated.
Their attempt at proof of work, essentially.
Yeah, but the problem is, so now money is not anonymous, so it's not fungible. It can be stopped or removed from circulation in an instant. So it's no longer durable. You can't count on it being there. Like, for example, you get a wire transfer from somebody you're doing business with, and you thought, legitimate businessman. He bought, I don't know, some computers from you.
Yeah.
Right. But then somebody finds that money comes from ill-gotten gains, and now you're out of pocket for that amount.
Yeah.
So it's no longer money, right?
Yep.
And now what I'm saying is we're destroying that at our own peril. We have to be very careful, right? Now and why this gets me so ticked off is the other part of it as I see it, right? And this kind of came to me from the following premise. So I have, again, I'm going to say the statement, disregard it if you think it's false. So there's only one way to become a billionaire. And I'm not talking about inheritance, right? Yeah. I mean, if you have to become a billionaire, there's only one way to do it. And that is by delivering a tremendous amount of value to a tremendous amount of people.
Concur, yes.
And that's the only way. Like, you can fake yourself into being a millionaire or rub yourself into being a millionaire, and getting there, it's kind of easy. put it in quotation. I
right.
understand
Relatively.
what it takes, but compared to being a billionaire, being a millionaire is way easy.
Yes.
Right. And so my analysis was, let's say this is true, right? What do I do with drug dealers?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're criminals, and at this point in time, they're one of the most dangerous criminals and vilified by society and everybody else. Like, they present a problem because they're billionaires and then multiple billions of dollars, right? And what do I do with this? And my only way for that equation to work is, let's accept it. They're delivering a ton of value to a ton of people.
That's a common element. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's
I'll add one other thing too, if I can. I don't want to take you off your thoughts. That I know several billionaires.
Yeah.
They all also took tremendous risk.
Yeah.
To be able to do that.
Oh,
as does the drug dealer, by the way. He takes tremendous risk.
So if the only way that you can get there is by delivering a tremendous amount of value to a tremendous amount of people, well, that means that we have outlawed normal human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So that puts us in a tough situation because, you start to think, is drug taking normal human behavior? Because we've all been told, like, everybody, nobody would do drugs if it weren't for these bad people that exist out there. But I doubt that, from
yes.
What I've seen out there in the wild, I don't think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so now we're in a situation where we're outlawing normal human behavior. And so this is where I'm down on it, is that you have to be like very careful when you're crafting laws not to outlaw normal human behavior. Because what happens is that if you criminalize normal human behavior, then you're basically creating a source of revenue for criminals. Yeah. Right? So, and if you look throughout history, this is exactly what's been happening. Like KYC AML laws are relatively new. And how they came about was that, first we had bootleggers and we had the gangsters in the late 20s, 30s, right? Yep. And what happened was that law enforcement officials had a really tough situation going on, which was the gangsters were making so much money that they became unprosecutable, right?
Yep.
Because the gangster, if they got indicted or whatever, would just buy the court.
Everybody, yeah.
The judicial system, like the judge, the jury, the opposite, the prosecutor, the cops. Everybody was on payroll. Yeah. And how do we fight that? You can't, right?
Yeah.
So they had to, reverse the prohibition law. Now you cut down to the 70s or 60s, where we were kind of in the same situation, not only now with drugs, and again, drug dealers buying the whole system.
Yeah.
And so now you're starting to see, technology come into play. You start seeing computers, and something that was unthinkable back in the 30s when everything was cash.
Yes.
Now you can say, I'll put in to fight with these guys. What I'll do is I'll invert due process, and they push the RICO laws, which is the Racketeering, Information, and Organization, whatever. And so they did that to basically be able to freeze assets without you being guilty or found guilty by any court. Mm-hmm. Right? Because now this law has also been used to prosecute people from Wall Street, by the way. So it's very broad,
Yes.
to say the least. And then what happened is they, you know, as always, criminals find a way around it. And so then they started pushing these KYC AML laws to tighten that use. But to me, what's going on is you're basically disrespecting the market signal. And the market signal is drugs are something people want. Mm-hmm. And you're regulating, normal human behavior or outlawing normal human behavior. Now, that means that 30% or more of people like to engage in that activity. That's what's, to me, normal human behavior. And the problem is you're funneling an enormous amount of resources into criminal hands. Because let's say you wouldn't have trouble prosecuting, or the same amount of trouble prosecuting a killer if that killer doesn't have access to drug money. Because there's very little money to be had in killing people. Mm-hmm. But there's a tremendous amount of money to be had with drugs, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're not listening to market, basically, is how I think about it.
Yeah.
And the side effect, the bad side effect is that we're destroying the ultimate agent of peace in the process. Yes. By trying to control this so hard, the cure is worse than the disease.
Yeah. And I agree with you completely. And I would add that I think when money, it has these attributes like you talked about, fungibility and divisibility and things like that. And it also has its use cases as unit of account, store of value, and medium of exchange. Well, I would say we've allowed as a society, we've allowed our governments to add control and surveillance as part of that mantra. So that has become so control and surveillance as part of money has become woven into it, almost into society's fabric now. That when pushback occurs on that, and I personally push back on that all the time. For instance, Bank Secrecy Act of 1970, which is the one that puts the $10,000 limits in the U.S. on you have to have full disclosure on deposits and withdrawals, similar to what you talked about in Guatemala. I find that a complete invasion of my privacy and my freedom. And the fact that law came into effect, that act was put in under the guise of, hey, if you're a good person, you shouldn't have to worry about it, number one. That's always a slippery slope. And the second part is, well, it's $10,000. Well, in 1970, $10,000 was more than the average household income in America. So a singular transaction greater than the earning power of one person. I still, by the way, object to it, but I could understand that 52 years later, nobody has adjusted that number. And we're now on the cusp of, you and I going for breakfast at IHOP and having to do a disclosure if one of us pays for it in cash is a problem.
Well, that's happening in El Salvador right now.
No, I'm not aware of that. Expand on that.
Yeah. Well, in El Salvador, if you spend more than $200 at the supermarket, they will KYC.
Wow.
$200.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah. So, and this is the interesting thing, I think, also being from a place that's so small, kind of your vacations are always abroad.
Yeah.
And so you get to come into all of these, weird or not weird, but like different ways of doing stuff, right? Where you realize very quickly, like everything's a little bit different everywhere.
Yeah.
And we're not homogeneous, by a long shot. And I think it's super dangerous to like again, remove the ultimate agent of peace or strip away its properties. And, these extra stuff that they're putting on it, like you said, it's they're not needed for money to be money,
Yes.
right? And most of the time, they're counterproductive, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's say, let's get rid of the, uh, uh, let's say, elephant in the room where, different jurisdictions have different laws, and, what's considered an outlaw somewhere might not be someplace else, might be a freedom fighter. It depends on,
Yes.
which side on the
Yes.
fence you're falling, right?
Yes.
And imagine there's like we're all operating under the same law universally worldwide. Imagine that utopia, right? Even then,
It could be utopia. That could be dystopian. I don't know.
well, let's call it a utopia from the lawmaker's perspective.
All right.
you know, or from the Illuminati perspective,
All
if
right.
you will.
Okay.
Even in that situation, you still have to bump into the following. And I've been recently rereading The Fountainhead after
Oh,
like 30 years.
yeah.
So, and towards the end, the main character goes into this whole summation and he's on trial and during that summation, he says something that was super interesting that I had completely forgotten about. And he goes into this rant. And bear in mind, this was written back in, I think, 1940,
Yeah, I believe
something
it
like
was in
that,
that era.
in
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah. Yeah.
40-ish time frame. And he says, without privacy, there is no freedom, or paraphrasing,
Yeah.
you know? And I thought, as soon as I read it, I thought, that's exactly
Hmm.
this is why privacy is so important. It's not about doing something bad, evil, or whatever, what have you. It's because if we give up our privacy, we're giving up our freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, we absolutely are.
And so, you want to give it up, feel free to do it. We can,
Yeah.
but you do it at your own risk,
Yeah.
at your own peril, and just know that how you're paying for that lack of privacy or that security is with your freedom.
Yep. It's this is a whole podcast of itself, one that I'm sure I will do soon. But right now, as a miner, I view there's a massive attack on privacy occurring. And we are seeing the factions within the government right now. I would say major figures in the U.S. would be Elizabeth Warren and Janet Yellen, as an example. The current Secretary Granholm, who's the Secretary of Energy, they are aligning to attack Bitcoin mining, and the mining community knows this, right? And for instance, Senator Warren had a hearing in late May where she was interviewing or questioning Secretary Granholm, and she said, Secretary Granholm, do you know who the largest Bitcoin miners are and how much energy they are using? Secretary Granholm said, no, but I would love to work with you on that. 8 weeks later, several of my mining compatriots, luckily not me, got letters from the Secretary of Energy demanding to know where they were mining and how much energy they were using. The mining community knows that this attack is happening, and we're somewhat united. However, most of the mining community is fighting back, saying, no, mining is good for the environment. No, mining helps solidify the grid. You're all wrong. So they're taking the attack or the response at that
Mhm.
level. My response is different. My response is every person in America
Mhm.
should be standing up against this, because what's happening is this is government going to private business and private individuals and saying, what are you plugging in to the outlets in your house? And they are setting up to regulate, tax, or even stop your ability to use that energy based on their moral, ethical, legal perspective of right or wrong use of energy. And so if they are allowed to do that, if we get to the point when, and the Biden administration appears to be laying some groundwork to say proof of work is illegal, or the use of energy to run a Bitcoin mining machine is either illegal or it needs to be taxed differently, then we've let the fox into the hen house. And now the decision can be made. Should people have pool heaters? Should they have hot water heaters? Should they use blow dryers? Is a soldering iron okay, but a microwave oven isn't? What, where do we go? And
How
these,
old is your microwave?
there
That
you
would be
go.
the question,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like if your appliance has less than X efficiency, you can't run it.
yeah.
Or you get into a very slippery slope really fast where you can also go into like, I don't like this industry.
Yes.
And how do you attack it? Energy wise. It consumes too much energy.
Yeah.
And so now we can't have this industry operating.
Right.
Right?
And ironically, occurring in parallel, when we have both at the federal level and several states pushing everybody to electronic vehicles. Well, I've done some studying on this. If we move 100% of the the car, if we all the cars in America are EVs, it will consume about 25% of the grid.
I think more.
Um,
Like,
okay, well,
are we taking semis into account?
no, just personal vehicles.
Oh,
Just personal vehicles.
okay.
Sorry.
Well, maybe then.
So, but whether it's 20, 10, 50, doesn't almost matter, right? That we're pushing this one thing that will strain the grid and push power consumption to a different level. At the same time, we're making a moral judgment about a different. So, in other words,
So here's where I fall on that argument. And I think the mining community is doing like a huge disservice to itself. And
no, it's
I don't
okay.
want to offend anybody,
It's
because
okay.
I know I'm
We can
talking to
disagree even.
miners, but I think it's the term mining, which is a little bit misleading, that is creating a lot of issue. Because, mining right now, it's getting a bad rap as a whole. And I'm not talking about Bitcoin mining. I'm talking about, you know, copper mining,
Yeah.
zinc mining, lithium
Lithium,
mining,
certainly. Yeah.
coal mining.
Yeah.
So
All these
we
exotics and
immediately
yeah.
associate mining with a dirty or undesirable for the environment industry, right?
Yeah. It's true.
But that's not mining. Bitcoin mining is a misnomer. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I understand why it got chosen as a word. Do not agree with it,
Mm-hmm.
but understand why it was chosen as a word. But if we come down to it, there's no mining going on. What's going on is Bitcoins are the IT department, or Bitcoin miners are the IT department of Bitcoin, of the Bitcoin ledger. So if we think of Bitcoin as a database, right, which it is,
Yeah.
every database has the same problem, right? Which is, how do I guarantee the integrity of my data so
Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't become corrupted, right?
Yeah.
And Bitcoin mining, all it's doing is it's guaranteeing the integrity of the data in the database. And by that measure, Bitcoin mining is no different than any other, let's call it, information security infrastructure. And I mean firewalls, and I mean, encryption machines, and I mean data centers. And so if we are outlawing, because that's what this would do, they would outlaw information security infrastructure, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
That's what you're doing. You're outlawing information security infrastructure. Like, what happens to your banks? How much kilowatts does JP Morgan consume in keeping their servers secure? How much does city, how much does the banking industry as a whole consume in kilowatt hours to guarantee the integrity of their data? Yeah. And then we have an apples to apples comparison. But, they go off on this tangent, and I should, if I were a miner, I would make it crystal clear to all of these senators that know nothing about technology, because they're completely ignorant, and just say, what you're trying to outlaw is information security.
Yeah. I think you could, by extension, by very sage. I really like that. Very good. I would also add, though, that we also have to add in the property right enforcement component as well, which some people have done this because we can get figures about how much does the defense and how much do police forces and defense systems and all that, what kind of energy do they consume? Yeah. Because they're also part of that defense network, right? Yeah. So for those banks and for those assets, because without them, we talked outside of this conversation today, but earlier in the day we talked about home ownership. Yeah. So what does it mean to own a home? Well, on one perspective, which we discussed earlier today, you might say, well, you never really own your home, because if you do not comply with property tax regulations and potentially even codes relative to the way you maintain your yard or your house or things like that, you could lose ownership of your home. So it's not that in and of itself. However, the second part is your ability to defend it and keep somebody from taking it from you. Yeah. And if you don't have the proper police state, and then backing that, the proper national defense, then you don't have anything either, right? You're going to get that stolen. So, but Bitcoin does. You made a comment earlier. I think that's that I think I'll let you expand on.
Yeah, it's I'm paraphrasing the Illuminati or the Davos people. That they went out and said, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy." I like to say, "You'll only own Bitcoin and you'll be happy."
Yeah,
and I think that's exactly right, because if you have this, uncorruptible, asset that nobody can take away from you, why would you own anything else?
Yeah.
You can just rent.
Yeah.
And then if somebody goes and, takes away, the car you rented or the house you rented or whatever that you rented, well, yeah, it might be an inconvenience, but it's not world shattering,
right?
As opposed to, let's take, for example, Ukraine, where, you get your house destroyed. So how do you come back from that?
It's tough. It's tough. I did a study, as you mentioned, Ukraine. I was curious about this question of how much value comes from security in the property right. So if you have a given item that you own, then that item has utility, and it has value from that, but there's a store of value component to it as well.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I was curious because I think real estate is probably the most common thing.
Yeah.
So what I did is I looked at what an acre of prime farmland cost in Iowa,
Mm-hmm.
and I compared that to an acre of land in Ukraine before the Russian occupation or the Russian conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And the number was approximately, so these acres of land had basically the same productivity, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They, if you planted wheat or corn on them, they would yield about
About
the
the same.
same. But the acre of land in Iowa was $7,500,
Mm-hmm.
and the acre of land in the Ukraine was 500. So it made me think, and I'm oversimplifying to a certain degree. Anybody listening, you can comment in, but I think it's true at a certain order of magnitude that this is a way of reflecting that the majority of the value of the Iowa land is in the store of value, not in the utility. Because I believe that the Ukrainian land is largely valued based on its short-term utility,
Yeah.
and the acre of Iowa land is basically in its store of value, long-term utility. So somewhere between there, is some insight um, into what strong property rights are worth and what they add to store value.
Well, I would argue that without pro- private property, there is no value. Like it says,
Well,
like for
well,
example,
that's almost true, right? Because the Ukraine land was worth $500. It was worth close to nothing.
yeah, it's kind of like, you know, if I can't say something is truly mine, or I am the sole owner of whatever, what has value? Nothing. It's like serfs during the feudal period.
Yeah.
If every piece of land belongs to the king, right?
Yeah.
Nobody and everybody lives by the grace of the king. You don't own nothing.
Yeah.
There's no value to be had.
That's true. Although ironically, even if there's not a king, if you live in a place where there's essentially no ability to protect it, it has the same effect.
Well, it's what happened to the Soviet Union. There's nothing of value in the Soviet Union. There's nothing of value in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because if it just can be taken away, why do I even bother? Right?
Yeah, right.
So if I can't be the owner of whatever the sweat of my brow produces, why do I sweat?
You won't.
Well, I will under
Under
penalty of and threat,
yes,
and I'll
yeah.
become a slave.
Coercion. You can be coerced to it. You
Yeah.
can be. It's a form of enslavement, but
Yeah.
beyond that, and that comes down to your will to live at that
Yeah.
point. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll trade off those two things.
Yeah, and so for me, it's private property is one of the most valuable, or it's the only valuable thing we have. Start from that premise, and how we express the value of that private property is through money. When we destroy money, we destroy private property. Again, it's this agent of peace.
Yeah.
The only reason we have private property is because we have money. If we do away with money, if we corrupt money, or put it another way, because people don't think money can go away, and they're sorely mistaken. Money can very easily suddenly become a credit score or social credit score, as is happening in China to a degree,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not money anymore. And if you don't have money, you don't have property, you don't have any rights, and congratulations, pat yourself on the back because you have no freedom.
Mhm.
So money is paramount, privacy is paramount if we want to, continue to flourish as a species. When I say this, because I found this to be true. And by the way, this leads me into why I think Bitcoin already won. I think Bitcoin already won because of the brain drain that's happening from everywhere else into Bitcoin. Today, I believe, and I firmly believe this, the brightest minds from every walk of life are migrating to Bitcoin. And and so and why are they doing it? Because Bitcoin operates at a supranational level in the freest jurisdiction that exists, which is the internet.
Mhm.
And the issue why freedom is so important is that creative minds cannot exist without freedom. The prerequisites for creative minds to flourish is freedom. You cannot have creativeness without freedom. And that to me is self-evident. We can go into why that premise is so, but I firmly believe that.
I do too. I think maybe some of the viewers know, but um I came through the personal computer industry from its essentially inception, and I got a chance to deal with a lot of really bright people. And what happened was there was a revolution occurring. It was
Mhm.
basically an information revolution,
Yeah.
and I was blessed to, I think, get surrounded by these people
Mhm.
who saw that this wasn't an enabler. It was step one of a process. I didn't realize it all at the time, of course, but it was step one of it. So these minds just gravitated, and first it was the personal computer, and then on top of that, really was the genesis of the internet. I mean, the internet and HTTP didn't happen um, till the
Yeah.
personal computer and the networking, and then all the branches from that. And personally,
Mhm.
um, after I left that industry, I found it difficult to associate with that same energy and that same intellect. It was hard. I couldn't find it
Mhm.
um, until Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and part of my excitement and my vigor is the opportunity to again associate with these great minds and guys like you that I've gotten to meet that um, I think push the envelope forward and do it from because because we have a certain freedom already, but also with the realization that we have to do this. That those of I mean, I feel an obligation. My wife would call it a calling. Like I have to do what I'm doing now because if I don't, I feel I will have been abandoning my calling, my duty to mankind, to my kids, to my grandkids,
To yourself.
and to myself. Yeah, I don't want to lay on my deathbed and say I didn't do this. Like my God, I mean, what a travesty if to
Yeah.
waste the days I have on this earth not doing something.
Yeah. And you know, it's so interesting because, drawing parallels, right? Is here's where I think my unique background comes into play as well because I was fortunate enough to my dad was kind of a geek or a nerd. I don't know why he just loved computers from the start. He was a tinkerer. He liked airplane models. He loved all that stuff. And so we were one of the first houses with a computer in Guatemala. Then we were one of the first houses with access to the internet in Guatemala. Like, okay, this is how bad it got. Like, I didn't have a phone line, but I had internet access.
Amazing.
So, so and I remember because the internet, the people that are, what you think of the internet right now, it's way different from what it was when I started going online. And you didn't have an Explorer,
Yeah.
right? It was all IP
Yeah.
addresses.
Yeah.
You email, you had to basically construct it from scratch. You had to kind of code it
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
going out. There's some
I was
very,
there.
very light programs that could help you along. And there was, so it was just chat rooms and email. And that was the internet, right? I remember Powwow. I remember, all of these chat services. And the chat services, you had two communities. You had porn and sex community, and you had, let's call it, the nerds.
Nerds. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was super interesting, when I think back on it. But it was that community of, let's quote unquote call them nerds. It was, you know people from all over the world that finally got a chance to interact with, you know on a regular basis, other people. Because what happens is, maybe you don't see it so much in more civilized countries, but when you come from the third world and you come from really impoverished countries, you know, you're so close to death in those communities. You're so close to like the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And they talk about the individuals, Maslow pyramid, that
Yep.
needs of,
Yep.
security, food,
Right.
housing, and then you go up a step, and then you go up a
Right.
step, and then you go up a step, right? Well, that happens also as a society, where if your society is stuck in that survival, step or
Yeah.
rung, right? You don't get culture.
Yeah.
You don't get scientists. You don't get, anything that you'd consider like normal day to day stuff. And so, if for whatever reason you're unlucky to be born here, right, with, a little bit of more intellectual curiosity, let's call it, where you kind of want to nourish that, it doesn't exist. And so you're basically walking alone in that society. You have nobody to talk to. You have nobody to interact to. And then this internet thing comes along, and you start to see, oh, there's other people out there that, I can have a conversation with, that is not about, who got killed yesterday, or, who's fucking who, or, how am I going to get fed tomorrow? But I can start talking about, more philosophical subjects about, why are we here? Why do we do what we do, and all that stuff. And so people really migrate to that, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that other jurisdiction, if they can get access.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful. And here's, you know, I recognize the power of the internet. That interaction of being able to talk to somebody that feels gets you, right? It's so important that right now in my country, in Guatemala, people will pay for their data plans before they pay for food.
Wow. Wow. I can understand that to a certain degree.
Right?
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I wonder, how smart would the world be? Will it be as all that energy that's being expended in these societies that are down at that first level? There's a lot of IQ, there's a lot of intelligence that's got to be directed, rightfully so, to survival. And as it frees, what does it do for Guatemala or the Philippines or Angola, or pick your country in the third world?
Well, I think the first thing it does is, you know, it increases peace. Uh, so one of the problems of being in one of those societies is that they're ultra violent,
Mm.
right? If you compare it to anywhere that's civilized,
Yeah.
right? And they're ultra violent because scarcity is so much a part of life that things that you don't react a certain way, and you have an excess of food in places where you have a scarcity of food, you react in a way different manner.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is that you'll see way less homicides
Yeah.
and war and all this stuff. I think war it's its own beast, because you also need another thing to happen, which is we gotta figure out a way to distribute power among more actors. You know, the only reason war happens is because there's one person that can direct, hundreds, if not millions, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, to go kill each other. That's how I think about it. I think we gotta figure out a way to kind of, you know, not allow that to happen as humans, but too much power in the hand of one person is not good.
Well, I see Bitcoin, in essence, is the ultimate embodiment of that, because there is no person or even people or committee or central authority. And with that, maybe it's a good time to shift a little bit and talk um, about IBEX.
Yeah.
And so you started this Bitcoin journey back in 2012, but was it 2016? You said
2017.
2017. Um, you took a different action. So maybe
Yeah.
talk about how did IBEX form, and
Well, 2012, what happened was, and here, bear in mind, not nearly as smart as I should be. Um, I wasn't smart enough to start mine.
Mhm.
So even though I got it and
Yeah.
everything, or not that I wasn't smart, I was lazy. I was super lazy. And I downloaded the Bitcoin Core client, but then, it was kind of a pain to get it up and running in the machine, and I didn't do it. And I just wanted to buy Bitcoin to see how it was. But, living in Guatemala, uh, there were nobody had Bitcoin to sell to me. I
Oh,
couldn't,
yeah.
yeah. I found out the empty Gox site, tried to wire money to Japan. Again, being from Guatemala, could not get my wire processed
Hmm.
because I didn't have a reason to send money to Japan. And so, but I thought I'll keep tabs on it.
Okay.
And so I always followed Bitcoin's growth and trajectory. And then in 2017, I was finally living uh, abroad. My wife had gone to get her master's in the Netherlands. And so I was living there with her. And I thought, now I have like a non-Guatemalan bank account.
Yeah.
I can probably, start to buy. Things had also advanced way more. You had Kraken, you had Coin Mama, you had Sexio, you had a bunch of services where you could buy Bitcoin, put down credit card, buy Bitcoin, and so that's what I did. And bought Bitcoin, promptly lost half.
Yeah.
Next day, like put in $1,000. Next day, had $500.
Yeah.
Whoa, got a little bit of whiplash, but it kind of prompted me down this Bitcoin rabbit hole, of just learning more and more about it, right? And figuring it if I had made a huge mistake or if there was something there. And the more I learned about it, the more positive I got on it, and the more Bitcoin I bought. And at some point, I ran out of money. Like I ran out of cash to
Yeah. Was your
responsibly.
wife supportive at this point?
No.
No. Okay.
Well, she thought I was crazy, but she wasn't mean about it.
Okay.
Yeah, she wasn't like, I forbid you to do, like,
Yeah.
okay, it's your money.
Yeah.
And she thought I was crazy. And towards the end, though, because I was talking to her like a bunch, and when we had to come back from Europe, we had bought a couple of bikes, some furniture and stuff. I told her, listen, sell everything. Getting euros to Guatemala is a pain in the ass anyway. Just go and buy Bitcoin with those euros at an ATM and bring the Bitcoin.
Beautiful. Beautiful case study, by the way,
Yeah.
or example.
Yeah. And so once I ran out of money, I called up my brother because he was alongside me. This is something we had been going back and forth on. And I told him, we were basically discussing it, and we came to this conclusion that Bitcoin for us was too important to not get more involved. Like, we consider ourselves passive investors in Bitcoin, but we wanted to be active investors. That means, we wanted to put our energy, we wanted to put our effort, we wanted to put our creativity and everything towards, uh, in a very, I guess, arrogant way to help Bitcoin chances of success, right? And from that is
I don't view
where,
that arrogant, by the way. That's an
well,
interesting choice of words, but
thinking you're gonna affect the outcome of something like Bitcoin,
but you did.
but we
You
wanted,
are.
and we wanted to, just be in the mix, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
like if you had hindsight 2020, right, and you can be part of the .com revolution, even if you were going to be at a company that didn't make it through it,
Yeah.
I would still take that chance. Like, just the stories you're gonna get out of it. Like, for
Absolutely.
example, I bet that you right now have some wild stories through your mining things.
Oh, I do, and I can also relate because
Yeah.
again, I came from the personal computers and the
Yeah.
.com. I was
Yeah.
kind of part of both of those, and I have over time. I'm sure many of these stories will come out even through these
Yeah.
podcasts,
Yeah.
but I can tell you stories about Microsoft and Intel and Dell and Toshiba and my own company Gateway and things that happened that aren't public today that I think
Yeah.
blow some people's minds.
Yeah. And that's
You
the
know,
thing, if you were at an arm's length for just reading about this in the newspapers, you're getting maybe 20% of the story.
yeah,
What really goes down would blow people's minds.
yes,
And and so you're not gonna take that chance of being in the middle, in the mix,
yeah,
taking hits, giving back,
oh yeah,
um,
yeah. So
you know,
it's
mixing
wild.
it up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so here, I'll tell you one, just as an example. I won't tell the story today, but I'll tell you one thing. So, for another day, but I as the product leader at Gateway
Mhm.
was asked by Microsoft to design the Xbox and build the Xbox for Microsoft. and it didn't end up happening. Um, for a whole variety of reasons. I will leave that story for another day. But those sort of things really happened in back rooms. And I'm very proud and happy, honored to have been part of that course in history. But I would say also to the personal computer companies, the software companies, the .coms, the hard drive makers, and the graphics card makers that didn't make it, they still all played a role. Everybody was part of that. So, this podcast being recorded on a personal computer right now, and somewhere in there is my DNA and the DNA of all those people, right? And so I'm proud of that, and I'm happy to have been part of that.
And it's interesting because, it's like you go to meetups now, right? And I remember one of the first meetups that we went to here in the Miami area. They were talking, they were educating the public on, the block size wars.
Yeah.
And that was right in 2017 when I was coming into it. So I lived through it, and we were already running a node with my brother, and we were, mixing it up in the forums and kind of reading about this and the pros and the cons and, all the drama that went on about what Bitmain wanted to do and, the Roger Ver debacle and all that stuff. And even if you're like removed, we weren't in the center of this by any means, but you were in the periphery and you're talking about this and chipping in, and it's super interesting. And so while the guys were, kind of talking about this, you can say, I was there.
Yeah.
I was there. I know how this went down, and they made this, questions about it that they were giving away some entrances to an event, and I didn't want to raise my hand because I felt like I was cheating. It's like you're answering a test about what happened in your life.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. So take me back though. So you're there, and you and your brother are trying to figure out how to get involved. And I took us off this because I wanted to contest that you were arrogant, because I don't think you were arrogant. I think you were aspirational. You're trying to be part of something, and you were. You're here today still as part of that. So, but what happened? How did IBEX happen?
So what happened was we were throwing up around, everything at the wall, all types of crazy ideas, everything from planning Bitcoin events to, developing hardware for Bitcoin to a bunch of whole host of stuff. And, at that time, looking at everything that we could do and looking back at it, we kind of came to this conclusion that, everything we were thinking about was great, but if there wasn't any on and off ramps, it didn't matter. And so what we needed to build first were decent on and off ramps into Bitcoin. And so, went back to Guatemala to try to do just that because, while how I see it is right now or back then, how we saw it was that for the, civilized countries in the first world, Bitcoin might have been a luxury. For the third world, it's a necessity. And so we're from the countries that stand to benefit the most out of these technologies. And I firmly believe that to that day.
I concur.
Like those countries really, really, really need this.
Yes.
Like it's ridiculous how much they need it. They don't even know. But so we went back home and we started this project. At first, it was just how do we make access to Bitcoin as easy as possible for as many people as we possibly can, within the limitations we have, operating in Guatemala. And and so
So what year? We're in 2017 now?
we're in 2018
2018.
now.
Okay.
This took a couple of months.
Yep. Understand. Yeah.
And so 2018 started, we contracted some developers to build like a full-fledged trading engine and stuff, and just something that the market in Guatemala didn't need, wasn't ready for.
Right.
And we spent a lot of money failing. And then we finally settle up on having like an OTC,
Mm-hmm.
an OTC, an OTC desk. And that's kind of when it really kind of started to get traction. And then in 2021, we got the chance to basically go to El Salvador and develop this piece of technology, which was Lightning, in such a manner.
So to that point, to the El Salvador announcement, June of 2021, your focus was on OTC. You're doing basically.
It was our focus, but we started looking ever since 2017. We kept tabs on Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
So for those that don't know, one of the biggest and most important parts of the block size world was SegWit. And the critical importance of SegWit, which is segregated witness. I'm not going to go into the technology, but the critical importance of the segregated witness Bitcoin improvement protocol is that it's a necessary component for Lightning, meaning if segregated witness does not get adopted, we cannot do Lightning on Bitcoin. It's as simple as that. And so, Lightning is so new. People don't understand how new it is.
Yeah.
So up to 2017, which is not that long ago, you couldn't do Lightning. Lightning was just like some words on a paper. Once segregated witness, was available, then you could actually start kind of tinkering around with Lightning in the wild. But you still needed to have enough adoption. Like to this day, there are some fairly important companies that haven't implemented the segregated witness BIP, right? I mean, exchanges where you could.
You want to name some, or for those of us that don't follow that as closely?
I believe Coinbase would be one of the most popular ones.
Wow.
They're still using the number one address,
Yeah.
Anyone you see that sends you a number one address or starts with a number one, they haven't. You want to go, if you see a number three, then you're okay. Three or a B, lowercase b. Anyway, and so we loved Lightning technology from the start because we understood how it would scale, which is another thing that annoys me when politicians talk about technology stuff. They do not understand how wrong they are. It wants me want to blow my brains. How wrong these people are, guys. If anybody from the Senate or anybody knows anybody from the Senate, tell them they are dumb, not dumb, but ignorant. And I'm trying to be the nicest. I don't expect anybody to know anything a priori. Just please do a deep dive or get somebody that actually understands the technology to explain it. Because what they're trying to do with this much energy per transaction is way off. The math does not check out.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's a ludicrous.
It's a ludicrous metric.
Yes,
it is. I'm annoyed just talking about it. I'm annoyed. It's they're ignorant. They're shouting from Mount Stupid. That's what my brother calls it.
Yes.
They climb up all the way to the pinnacle of Mount Stupid and are starting to shout. And so, yeah, because what Lightning does is it allows you to push n amount of transactions in one transaction,
Yep.
which makes it infinitely efficient.
Yes.
And your cost of transaction drops down to zero,
yep.
literally speaking.
Yep.
And so we knew this. We identified Lightning as one of those core technologies that we wanted to be involved in. We thought, we missed the mining train, because by the time we wanted to do mining, we did our own experiments, set up our mining rigs, mined with GPUs as well, and some light things out there. But we knew we missed it. But we didn't want to miss Lightning. And so when we had the opportunity, we jumped at it.
And so when was IBEX officially formed as a company?
2018.
2018. Okay.
Yeah.
And in Guatemala.
Yeah.
And IBEX, which is the horned goat, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How did you pick that as your symbol?
Like I mentioned, I was in Europe at that time, and part of my family is Swiss. And I had gone to visit. We were on a ski trip with my cousins, and I already had the idea that we wanted to have this company to do Bitcoin stuff, right? But I didn't have a name or a good enough name. And so when we were driving up this and, just talking with my cousin, and like, maybe it's a little bit cool if I could like a callback to my,
Yes.
ancestry or whatever, and like, oh, everybody knows the Matterhorn, which is the big, or the Alps. Everybody knows, and it's played out, and everybody knows, the Swiss clock, and everybody knows the cross, and we're like. And so I asked him, listen, what is kind of unique here? Do you have like a national animal or something like that? And he's like, I don't know. Maybe he goes, maybe the Steinbock. I'm like, Steinbock?
Doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but
yeah, it's also called IBEX. And I'm like,
oh,
that's a nice name. That's a good name, I thought.
Okay.
And that's how it came about.
And then Mercado, Spanish for marketplace, or
marketplace. Yeah. Although right now, as we transition into more of a technology company, we're dropping that
just
down.
using IBEX.
Yeah, because at this point, really, although we still do some OTC and we have that part of the business, we're really much more focused on delivering Lightning into the hands of as many people as we possibly can.
Yeah. Well, that's you somewhat answered what the question I was going to ask next, but maybe expand on that a little bit. So, as you look at what's in front of you, and we live in a fast-paced world, so let's maybe talk about the next year or so. What are you going to try to accomplish? Where are you now, and then what do you want to try to accomplish in the next, let's say, year?
Well, from the Lightning technology perspective, we're a very young company. We're 1 year old, right? For all practical purposes. And so now we just started getting, some good data and some good traction outside of El Salvador, because El Salvador is kind of this weird little experiment that you cannot know if it's replicatable or not, right? It's weird when you're forced to adopt a technology.
Yeah.
Whether, organic growth is a little bit different. And so now we're kind of rolling out into other jurisdictions, some more kind of bigger, interesting jurisdictions. We're seeing some good traction, and moving forward. I think this year was super important because it's only after you do something for a long time, like you repeat it and you repeat it and you repeat it, like things start to kind of clear themselves. Like when you start out, it's kind of that fog of war type deal. And then as you start like going over something over and over and over again, that fog of war starts to dissipate. And at this point, I think I'm pretty certain. I know why Lightning wins. Because, you know, if you're talking about, we'll use Lightning to pay for another, it's a different way to pay for a cup of coffee. Do we? Do we need to? Do we really need that? A lot of people would argue no, right? Where I think Lightning excels is enabling all the commerce that cannot be done today because it's being limited by the technology we have access to. So, for example, it's kind of like the steamship in this sense, right? Like before, without steamships, you wouldn't have the industries you have today, right? You needed steamships to actually make producing in one part of the world and consuming in another part of the world viable. If not, you're down to only local consumption, right? Then your industry cannot grow beyond whatever your local market tolerates. And so here's a clear case, let's say steamships, of a technology enabling a new way to do commerce, which is previously unavailable. And I think Lightning, similar to that, will enable new forms of commerce. Why and how? It's because you have no lower bound limit to the amount of value you can transfer across vast distances. And that enables a new type of commerce that has been heretofore unseen, unheard of.
That's really perceptive, by the way. That's the first time, at least, I've heard that comment. But you're absolutely right. If I want to transfer the equivalent of $3 of value from here to Guatemala, there's no way to do that.
No.
That's a very interesting comment.
No, even with like internet portals, payments and stuff. And it gets even more interesting when you figure out, okay, how low can you go, right? Can I do 5 cents? And what does that enable? Because here's the thing. Most people, and this was actually talking to a good friend of mine. And I made this observation. The subscription model is broken, right? That means you can have X amount of subscription services and no more. It varies for each person, but let's say on the lower bound, you can have 3 subscription services. On the upper bound, you may have 10 to 12. But beyond 12, any other new subscription service that comes in has a titanic wall that they need to climb to get your business. Like after you're done, after you have your HBO, Paramount, Disney, Hulu, Netflix, the next video streaming service, how hard do they have to sell you on it?
Yeah, pretty freaking hard, man. Pretty freaking hard.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I was making this point and I thought, well, if you have this other monetization, method where you can pay by the second, it opens up that playing field for those new entrants, right? Because it's kind of like the old newsstand model where, I remember you had the magazines you subscribed to, but if you went by a newsstand and something caught your eye, you could just buy that one-off magazine. And if you bought enough of those every month or whatever, then you would get the subscription because then you think, okay, now it's worth it, right? And so it brings in this new sales funnel. I see your point, he says, but him being also, he's from El Salvador. He says subscriptions in Latin America are not even getting off the ground. Because we're talking about a market where people can't even afford like a full size shampoo bottle.
Yeah.
They're buying the mini shampoo bottle because they're purchasing what they can afford that week.
Right.
They're not thinking about for the month.
Yeah.
And then, so in our countries, subscription model is not even viable.
Yeah.
But a pay as you model, as you pay as you go model is.
Yeah.
And now what we have the technology to actually deliver.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I remember going to the Philippines the first time with my wife, and similar, you know, a lot of poverty, a lot of very poor people. And I remember walking down the street, and there would be people with, they would be wearing a little tray, and they'd be selling individual sticks of chewing gum, one cigarette, one piece of candy, a mint or something like that. That in Western markets, you buy a pack of gum, you buy a pack of cigarettes. You would never think that to buy one cigarette. But they were doing that, and they were using Philippine pesos, but um, uh, to do it. But you know, these micro transactions that would have never, that blew my mind even that existed. But you're right; those for to support that economy is absolutely critical.
And to do it digitally and to do it over distance.
Yeah.
So now, let's say you're a content creator that, is not getting a lot of traction. Or maybe you're a content creator from one of these countries. And here's where scale matters, right? Because we don't think about it too much. But let's say if you're living on, let's say, $3 a day, and you can earn 30 cents more every day by delivering, whatever service online. I know Spanish. I'll identify, a picture with a Spanish word. A cat, gato, dog, perro, eagle, águila. And I do that for, let's say, half an hour, and I earn 30 extra cents. Well, 30 extra cents is not a lot, but to that person, it's a 10% increase in monthly earnings. That changes stuff. And so I think, what's going to happen is, I hope this is what's going to happen, is that people in our countries realize this, right? They start doing all of this new commerce. We give them the tools. And then civilized countries, Western countries, for the most part, take notice that they're losing out on a huge amount of business and a huge amount of new commercial opportunities, because there's this whole new world out there that didn't exist previously.
Yeah.
This is like, we're in this fishbowl of payments where you can do only this. Yeah. But now we have a whole new ocean.
Yeah.
So get out of that fishbowl.
Well, the 330-ish million people in the US, but 8 billion people in the world. And I'm throwing a number out, but 5 billion living, maybe even more, in that world where those micro payments are critical, where that 30 cents a day makes a difference. And collectively a very large market too. So yeah, fascinating. I haven't really talked to anybody about Lightning from that perspective. I really love it though, because it also reinforces that I think the revolution that we're part of, the change that we're trying to make, is got to come from the ashes of the second and third world. That I think they can drive it. I was go ahead.
Well, to that, I hope it does, but I'm not, we need more than that. But and I'll tell you why. I think it's going to be bottom up, but it's also got to be top down. It has to be like yeah, like
Okay.
a sandwich,
Yeah.
we have to have the people that are
Yeah.
in the bottom at doing this, but we also need the people at the top doing it. And to me, my closest analogy for Lightning is that it's like the email, and in a several parts. So I'll break it down. So first of all, Lightning is like email in the sense that Lightning is to Bitcoin what email was to the internet, which is the killer app, right?
Okay.
It's what makes it worth it,
Yeah.
right? And now here comes the second part where Lightning is like email. Why do we still, and why Lightning also wins against the traditional payment systems? So why do we still have email? Like if you think about it, why? Because it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a particularly good piece of technology or software. Like there's things out there that are way better, like Slack. You have Slack, you have WhatsApp, you have Telegram, you have Signal, you have all of these things that do so much more and so much better than email.
Yep.
But you still have email. Why?
Yeah.
No.
Why
do you think?
Well, I think comfort, legacy. Um, I guess I'm
Because it's open.
well. Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Email is the only communications technology that for sure, if you bump into somebody online, they have.
That's it. That's fair. Yeah.
And that they can access.
Yeah.
Right?
It doesn't matter what domain they're on or anything like that. Yeah. Give me your email address. I can send a message.
It doesn't matter if I use Gmail, you use Hotmail,
right?
Yahoo, Proton Mail, whatever it is, we can communicate.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference, I think. And Lightning is like that. Only we're going in reverse, right? Because email started open and now we have all of these closed communications channels.
Yeah.
Now we have all of these closed communication channels, and here comes the open channel, which is gonna change the game. Because what happens is, this is a discussion I have with, let's say, not discussion, but one of the things we talked about with investors is that VCs always like to ask you, like, who's your competition, right?
Yeah.
That's the number one.
Yeah.
And to us, we have competition in a sense, but in a sense, they're also our collaborators, because every user that Strike adds can pay at an IBEX payment terminal. Every payment terminal we put into circulation is a place that Strike user can go to, that the Cash App user can go to, that the Bottle Pay user can go to, that the Wallet of Satoshi user can go to.
Yes.
And so it's a bunch of Lightning companies aggregating users to the same platform at the same time.
Right.
And it's not a closed ecosystem. And so that's another way that Lightning is like email, right?
Yep. Awesome.
And then I think Lightning is also going to be like email in the fact that once companies realize how much money they can save by moving to a Lightning standard, they'll push it, because email was around for a long time. What is it, like 20 years before it really caught on?
Yeah, I was probably using it in some form or another in
90?
Yeah, by 1990.
92-ish?
Yeah.
Something around there, right?
Yeah.
But when it really caught on was when companies, multinational companies specifically, realized how much they could save on memos.
Yeah.
And that's why the current format of the email we have is a memo format, right?
Yeah.
It's the to field, the CC field, the BCC field.
Yeah.
And these were all fields you had to like fill out by hand.
Yeah.
If you remember memos, anybody out there is old enough.
Yeah.
You had the subject matter, and then you had the actual memo, right? And that's the format we have for email. Used to have for email.
Yeah.
And so companies came along and they said, we're wasting this amount of money in communication, intra-company communication, like millions of dollars. And if we
Yeah.
switch to email, that goes away. And then they really pushed the switch.
Yeah.
And they made every employee, okay, now you have to use this. It wasn't optional. You suddenly found yourself at work having to learn this.
Yes.
But then people kind of, realized, oh, this is actually better. This is actually
Oh,
easier. And now I
yes.
can do this.
Yeah.
And but it was a strong push by these multinationals. And,
Yeah.
once I think multinationals realize how much money they can save. Now, obviously, that adoption is a little bit slower because there's a lot of, let's call it logistical or operational, you know, um, things you have to go through, and you have to have the technology that's mature enough that can actually, help them go through that process. But when that is ready, and the first multinational companies adopted, because this is also what happened with email. One company adopted it, and the other ones were like, oh, we'll wait and see. It's too disruptive to my flow, whatever.
Yeah.
But once they saw they couldn't compete, what did they do? We need email,
Yeah.
and we need it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you coming from that hardware and kind of software world know this to be true. That's where Microsoft Exchange basically took over the world.
Oh, it was huge there.
Took over the
Yeah.
world because
Yeah.
every company had their own email servers to start with.
Yeah. And I can attest, having been in, I worked for a Fortune 500 company from out of college in 1986 to about 91. And somewhere in there, I'm guessing 1990, we did get email.
Yeah.
So a few interesting things is, one is, I remember early in my career, as you said, the memo.
Yeah.
The memo was Friday is jeans Friday, because we
Yeah.
used to be, it was a very corporate, like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but oh, we got a jeans day on Friday, or the corporate barbecue or all hands meeting, and you'd get that in your desk, in
Yeah.
your inbox, literally, like the
Yeah. Yeah. You
inbox.
had.
And there really was an
Yeah.
inbox. Like you would have a paper tray, an inbox and an outbox, and we had a mail person whose job was to deliver those. And then when email first came about, um, we had our own internal email. It was not
Mhm.
connected to anything
No.
externally. So we had a network, token ring network for the real geeks out there, which preceded Ethernet.
Yeah.
But it was a token ring network, which is IBM technology. And I remember the mail system that we had. It had it was only 8 characters for the
Or the memo field.
yeah. And well, so
Subject.
no, the name.
Oh.
So it was like, so I still, to this day, I
Uh-huh.
have a personal email, which hopefully nobody, but it's BURNE, which is the first 5 letters of my last name,
Mhm.
and BOB, which are the first 3 letters of my last name.
Mhm.
So it was 5 and 3. So that was the format was 5 and 3. So you could you could you could know intuitively how to send an email to somebody,
Yeah.
because everybody followed 5 and 3. Of course, until too many people started having email,
Yeah.
and then we had a problem
Yeah.
because we ran out of 5 and 3s.
Yeah.
And then when we started, and like I said, first it was all internal, and then uh it took quite a while, but I knew the world had changed. It was probably about 93
Mm-hmm.
when you started getting every business card had the email address on. So that was a major change point
Yeah.
and I would say from that point. But interestingly, as you said, 93, not quite, the internet's kind of it's brewing, it's on the horizon. It's when we talk about gradually then suddenly, we talk about those
Yeah.
inflection points. The gradually was just about to turn to suddenly,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and so but you're right. I think that's really important, the open architecture piece, and very promising for Lightning,
Yeah.
because it's a world I have a level of expertise that is deficient in my opinion right now. I have to work on it. But I have um, I have gone here in Miami and bought tacos
Yeah.
using my Strike wallet on an IBEX paper terminal.
Yeah.
I've experienced that myself. So, you're right, and it works. And I've used Lightning all over the world at this point
Yeah.
in one form or another, and it's worked for me flawlessly. I've never had an issue.
Yeah.
So where do you think we are in this evolution? So how I don't want to force you to put a time frame on it because those are really hard things to do, I believe. But are we are we where email was in 93 right now? Are we
I would be probably a little bit more conservative. Probably we're in email in 92-ish.
okay?
We're starting to get out of we're starting to get out of the, let's say, single. Here's what I mean, right? Um, Technology always starts as a very personal thing. That's how I see it, you know, and 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 it takes a little bit of time out there in the wild before it's going to be available for, let's call it, the enterprise
Mhm.
customer.
Yeah.
And and I I think, no, as big as P2P is and important, right? You should remember that we things get adopted really at an enterprise level. Like if we want something to get adopted worldwide, it needs that enterprise functionality. It happened with, you know, happened with the steam engine. It happened with the internal combustion engine. It happened with, the computer. It happened with the email and internet, as we just discussed right now. I think that we really, and that's where we are right now. We're so IBEX. What I think is a little bit different about IBEX versus other Lightning companies is that we're very much focused on building out that B2B um, tool set, right? Which is what you need to deploy. So, for example, email doesn't get deployed at the enterprise level without Microsoft Exchange Server.
Mhm. I agree.
It's impossible. You cannot do it like it was functioning before. You needed that kind of core piece of technology. And that's why, people, I don't think right now understand or remember. And I hope somebody does like a deep dive into why Microsoft 95 was such a big deal. You got to go back there. Like,
I was there. I was literally there. I was
yeah.
at the Windows 95 launch event in Seattle. So
And, and it blew people's minds, not because, this is a great consumer product. It blew people's minds because now enterprise had that, you know, Macintosh or,
yeah,
GUI experience at the corporate level
yeah,
or enterprise level. You could actually run things
yeah.
because, I was just listening to this YouTube right now because the things when you go to a business works very different from a person. And they're talking about Linux and what breaks Linux and the user experience and all of this. And and he makes an interesting point. Linus Torvalds makes this really interesting point that the number one question they get asked by the people that run infrastructure whenever Linux deploys a new feature is, okay, this is great, but where has it been running successfully for at least 3 years?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we're kind of in that process of maturing this technology, and we have all of these plans. So right now we're getting SOC2 ready, right? But an SOC2 certification takes 6 to 10 months.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting ISO 27000, whatever, ready. Mm-hmm. Like we might be ready, but we need to go through the certification process. Yeah. That takes, however many months. We need to have these SLAs. We need to have, insurance. We have to have an enterprise product that, somebody that at that level can say, I'm comfortable enough, buying this service from you because I know you meet with these standards, and I have a reasonable expectation that you will not fuck up my my business, yeah. Right?
Yeah. Well, that goes all the way back, like you said. I mean, that was the exact same conversation in the late 80s. If you talk to an IT professional, yeah. Exact same thing. Yeah. And they're very risk averse group,
and they have to be.
And yeah, they're frustrating sometimes because I've been in the same boat as you since 1986, which is I'm trying to sell technology to them.
Yeah.
And so even things like the adoption of the personal computer into the marketplace, replacing terminals,
yeah,
like replacing Wise terminals, and things like that. I mean,
and the Unix,
yeah. Stuff. So I mean, that was my challenge at that time, yeah.
But this does everything I needed to do.
Yes. Yes.
It already works. Why do I need?
Right. And the inability of the general public to or even people that are in the know to envision the future is really difficult. And so
you have to show it.
Yeah, you have.
Like I think that's one of the great things, and why Steve Jobs is such an outlier, right?
Yeah.
And why he was so important at Apple is not only could he see the future, he could actually, give the guidance, because he didn't build it, but he gave that guidance so that you got close enough in the final product to what he envisioned, and then you could put it into people's hands.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, most people can't see it until they feel it.
Right. And you're absolutely right about Jobs. And I, as you know, I think many people on the podcast, I worked for Gateway, and I was the chief technology officer there. And I worked for a guy named Ted Waite, who was the founder and CEO of Gateway. Great guy. Mm-hmm. And what I would say about him was he was a pretty good product guy too. He had some pretty good visions for himself. Mm-hmm. But he also recognized that, I think, when it came, and he didn't care what the market focus group study said, because I think he knew it was bullshit. I knew it was bullshit. Yeah. That, because when you present new concepts to people, they especially, like, you give them an either or. Like, I'll give you an example. In 1987, state-of-the-art laptop would have weighed about 12.5 pounds, cost $3,500. It would have been a blue monochrome LED screen. It would have a 5 to 10 megabyte hard drive, would have ran MS-DOS, a 286 processor. Okay?
286, I remember everything.
So, I, with some other members of the company I was working for then at Zenith, I was designing laptops at the time. We went to management and we said, hey, we can start really pushing the envelope. We can already envision in 2 generations, we can get this same capability for the same price to a kilogram. And the summary of the answer was just make that one cheaper. We could sell a lot more of those if they were 2,800 instead of 35. So, we did that for a while, and then eventually a group of us left, and we went and pursued that. By the way, I did that as a startup, and that's how I ended up at Gateway. Was that they bought my product, essentially bought me and my company, as a result of that. But there wasn't a single piece of market data that supported that vision of small, light, portable laptops.
Well, and it's one thing that, when you say, we'll optimize, right? But here's where it gets really tricky, right? Let's say I'm gonna take a dumb example, but just because it came to mind, right? Let's say you're in the business of data storage. Mm-hmm. You're spinning platters, right? Which is most hard drives were that for a long time.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly thinking about how to get more data into this spinning drive, right? And so up the RPMs, so we get better bearings, we get tighter tolerances, we get, a better needle, we get, read heads, we go from, I don't know, 100 nanometers to 50 to 10 to,
right.
How low can we go? Can we read the atom? And but we're still just spinning versus, the leap it takes to go, wait, I can do this in solid state memory.
Yeah.
Like I can grab what we're doing with RAM and just have it be permanent.
Yeah.
And it's very different.
Yeah.
And the leap is not intuitive. And you go to somebody that's in this world of spinning platters and you say, listen, I can just move zeros and ones around in a solid state way. But how? Right? But how? I don't trust it. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. Oh, okay, you might do it, but is it reliable enough for my data center?
Yes.
And then you get into that.
Yeah. Well, I was part of that very one. Because again, I'm designing laptop computers, so I was literally part of those discussions. And it was interesting because most of the hard disk companies, for instance, Western Digital, Maxtor, Seagate, those would have been the companies at that time. They would have skunk work groups trying to come up with solid state technology. And at the same time, they had other groups, R&D groups, doing the things we just talked about, which was, driving more capacity faster, all those sorts of things. I don't think any of them succeeded in the solid state side. And they didn't really even stick with it. And I think part of it is that at the end of the day, for the longest period of time, they would really come down to, the cost per megabyte
is too
high. And it's just too high. It's too high. And they weren't willing to keep the investment until that inflection point changes. But once that crossover happened, the whole industry changed.
The other part is we have to remember that leap in technology, right? That complete 180 or change, or it's not even a 180. It's like, this is a whole new field we're working on, right? Is that at first it's way worse than where you're coming from, right? So you have this really, finely tuned piece of hardware that never fails or rarely fails. You got 99.99 whatever reliability. It's great, and the first solid state drives, they were kind of iffy as well. It's like, sometimes the information got lost. Sometimes, you couldn't. And it's kind of like the same story with Bitcoin, right? Because, if you compare it to payments technology now, right? Like at the start, let's go to 2010, 2012, or 2017, where we really stretched this. Okay, but can you do 400 transactions per second? But can you do 40,000 transactions per second? Impossible. This is just plain impossible. But we're working, companies like mine are working exactly on that issue of, you know, not only hitting 40,000 transactions per second, but 10xing it. Mm-hmm. Because our target isn't doing 40,000 transactions per second. Our target is doing millions of transactions per second. Mm-hmm. Why do we need millions of transactions per second? Because we're talking about moving smaller amounts of value more often. So if you're doing, let's say, $1 transactions, you can, or even $5 transactions, and 40,000 transactions per second gives you, I don't know, 5 times 4, 200. So you're moving 2 million or whatever amount of money per second, right? Mm-hmm. But if you cut that and you move one cent, you're coming down from $5 to 1 cent. And to move those $2 million that need to get moved anyway, you're going to have to up your transaction throughput considerably. Yeah. And that's, I think another difference, because people that are not, these are very specialized pockets of technology or knowledge that we're talking about, right? we're doing deep dives here, yes. Deep cuts. So, but people don't understand that the current payments technology is kind of reaching its limit if it hasn't already. Like, you cannot pump out a lot more efficiency out of it. It's kind of like hard disk drives, right? With a spinning platter. They kind of reached, like, sure, you might get some efficiency right now, but you're not going to do twice what you're able to do.
Right.
Like within one single drive.
Yeah.
Like, you reach 10 terabytes. 10 terabytes already poses some serious hardware problems.
Yeah.
You're not going to go to 20 or 25 or 30 without some serious compromises.
Well, you start reaching it. We see it, for instance, in chip technology, because of Moore's law, which Moore's law really isn't a law in the scientific sense, because it's already degraded. Yeah. It used to be the number of transistors in a given square area would double every year, and then it was 18 months, and now it was 2 years, and now it's somewhere more than that. But we're approaching atomic level. And
because you're 5 nanometers. Like, how much smaller can you get?
And right? I think, people project to maybe 2 nanometers. But
the thing is this, because I'm sure you know this, I'm preaching to choir here, where I see the limit in it, and something to, I'm going to give you the bird's eye view, right, to most of the listeners, because I don't know how this is interesting to most people, but to me it super is. It's not about not being able to manufacture at that level. It's about how to manufacture at that small enough dimension with enough precision that you get consistent runs.
Oh, that's absolutely true.
Right?
Absolutely true. Yeah.
Because you can do a one-off. Yeah. That's pretty much no problem. That's solved.
Yeah.
But how do we get 100,000 runs that, I don't have to dump half?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that's true across so many things in technology. For instance, like I said, we're deep dive. The beautiful thing for people is there's a fast forward button and a stop button if you don't like it, but here we are. So I'll give you an example, though. I was approached so many times over the course of my career with new battery technologies. Yeah. And often people would come in, they may be people from academia or a startup, and they would say, hey, look, I have this battery and we can blow away the battery performance of all of your laptops. I said, okay, so they'd show it to me and they would demonstrate it. And I'd say, great. Can you give me 100 cells that are exactly the same? And say, we'll get back to you. And the truth of the matter is, basically none of them ever came back, because to produce a battery cell with the new technology that has the same charging characteristics, the same discharge characteristics, produces the same voltage, that and you can do it, by the way, safely. Um, Really, really hard. It takes massive amounts of money and years of development, not only of the technology, but the production techniques, quality control techniques. And so, by the way, I'm less optimistic. I think a lot of people are very optimistic about battery technology and it solving a lot of the grid problems. I'm more pessimistic for several reasons, but this being one of them, that battery technology takes a long time to develop.
Takes a long time to develop, and specifically anything that's manufactured, in my experience, it's one thing to do it in lab conditions. It's way different to do it at scale, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that adage, or that, I don't know, Harvard Business Review example, or I don't know, maybe it's not those guys, it's the Kent Business School or whoever came up with this. Like, okay, you go to the street and ask anybody, can you do a better burger than McDonald's? Everybody says yes, or most everybody, right? Yeah, but you go and you ask, can you deliver $1 million? No, 1 million burgers per day?
Yeah.
Better than McDonald's? Impossible.
Right.
There's one company that does it. It's McDonald's, and
yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. And by the way, they do it in Japan, they do it in Guatemala, they do it in New York City. And I've gone to McDonald's in all those places and they are the same. They're very, very
specifically the fries. The fries is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's the same fry everywhere. The amount of engineering that's behind that fry, I don't think people even can.
It's flabbergasting how good it is. Yeah.
And so, to your point, and so right now we're working very hard in getting, our technology to the point where it's deployable at scale. So in that sense, that's why I said we're probably a little bit earlier. Yeah. I think by 93, 94-ish, like email and internet and intranet, remember, solutions were kind of like super well identified. Windows 95 already knew what it had to do, and they were in the middle of that. Most companies had understood that they needed an email to compete at a global level, and they were just working through the what the growing pains of email adoption for a company would be, because it's money, right?
Yeah.
Like most things that get adopted at company level, and I think this is again for most people that are very much P2P focused, but I want to explain, is that most things that get adopted at a company level carry a huge amount of cost, whatever it is. Like changing paper, which is ridiculous to think about, carries cost, right? And so when you're talking about something like a payments technology or a digital infrastructure technology, that cost can get out of hand really fast if you don't have the proper, processes in place to kind of get to the end of the tunnel to when you will be making more money because of it, right? But you got to go through that.
Yep.
Like, there are companies out there that have failed because they changed a CRM or tried to.
Yeah.
Companies that have failed, not for changing it, but for trying to implement a CRM. And so
Yeah.
when businesses are a little bit hesitant, I fully
Yeah.
understand them. And you gotta really understand the pain points of being a business, what it takes to roll out a new piece of technology and make it as painless as possible to them
Yeah.
so that it actually gets adopted in a successful enough manner.
So how much, if you're B2B focused,
Yeah.
as you are out there trying to increase adoption with these businesses, how much of what they're saying is, well, are the customers there? Are the users there? Do they ask that question a lot? And so is this
Number
another
one
case
question.
of, and so, what do you or what do we have to do to kind of drive that piece up so that they know that I have a Strike wallet.
Yeah.
I have I have a couple different wallets and I've got some money in there and I can spend money that way.
I think exactly just every place that you go to, it's ask, can I pay with Bitcoin? Do you guys take Bitcoin? Have you heard about it? People that are friendly with restaurant orders or your local restaurant chain. If you're a franchise owner, asking, listen, I want to start taking Bitcoin payments to the head office, right? They you own a chain of Chipotles and call Chipotle headquarters and say, listen, can I accept Bitcoin? Can I put in something besides the cashier, right? And if when enough people do that, it catches their eye and they say, okay, this is something we need to pay attention to because our customers are demanding it. From our side, we see adoption from a lot of times startups. It's a lot easier sell on the B2B
Sure.
side because they don't have all of the institutional baggage of necessarily a more established institution. And that's kind of good because it's what gives startups that opportunity. Imagine if somebody like IBM could move as fast as somebody like uh, I don't know, Apple in that back back when Apple moved fast, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a way different ball game. It gives no opportunity for new entrants, and that's where new entrants come in when they can take advantage of superior technology to just push the needle, find efficiencies that where your larger competitors just cannot play in because they can't adopt the technology, and that's your advantage. That's why if you're a startup, you're always trying to adopt the latest and greatest. And right now, I would argue if you are a startup, let's say in the payments industry, in the fintech industry, you have to seriously consider a lightning strategy because that's where you can play that, Bank of America. Because if they could, you wouldn't stand a chance.
How do you see, see, we're Bitcoiners, through and through. Um, on the occasions when I choose to interact with those from outside our community, but in the quote unquote crypto world,
Yeah.
um, they often state aspirations similar to Lightning.
Yeah.
Um, how often do you see them uh, as you're out kind of interfacing with potential customers or current customers?
Not at all. To be honest, rarely do you. So here's some interesting statistics, right? So Bitcoin basically has 2 times the awareness with the public than the next best known crypto, which is Ether, which is doing something else, right? Completely something else. So when you're talking about payments, what you're talking about is like maybe you hear somebody doing, I don't bump into them, honestly. Like, and to be fair, no, I, as a Bitcoiner, I like the crypto guys. Like, I you gotta be kind to them, first of all. Uh, I don't know how, you know, if anybody was smart enough as a Bitcoiner to say this is the only thing, because I've had my shitcoiner phase. I went through it. I bought everything under the sun, and then
Yeah.
so I cannot criticize somebody for kind of feeling curious about something else. Can't knock it. I'll explain why I think it's Bitcoin has the biggest value proposition. And at this point, to me, it's really, you know, the only way I can work really is in Bitcoin, just because even if I wanted to have some other, crypto within our solution, there's nothing out there that has the security, the liquidity, and the recognizability that Bitcoin has. So even if I wanted to have something else, I can't. I just can't. I can't go to a customer and say, there's this technology with the same comfort I have with Bitcoin, because I don't know how much value I can push through, let's say the Solana network. Like, sure, maybe I can do a couple million, but can I do a couple billion?
Yeah. And can you do it reliably? Can you do it without censorship? And that's where I don't hate people unless they lie
Mm-hmm.
or they mislead other people. That's where so I don't hate the crypto. There are
There is
individuals.
one crypto I will hate, and I have no problem saying I hate it, and
Yeah.
I hate everything about it, and I hate founders, and I hate everything they stand for, which is Ripple.
Okay. We are in agreement there. Yes, I agree.
Which is Ripple. And so with that disclaimer, everybody else kind of gets a pass.
Yeah. Well, I think justifiably. But I think that leads to it where they, that specific group has done very specific things to try to mislead the public. Uh, One about what their capabilities were, and even more importantly, trying to mislead them about what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin can do. And it really lost me with the Chris Larson with the $5 million campaign on change the code of Bitcoin. Um, it we're about to play a game here called
Mm-hmm.
Corrupt or Incompetent. I,
Mm-hmm.
I, I told you this,
Yeah.
and those regular listeners know this game. But you know, there's corruption there,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe we'll start the game with these guys here. I didn't plan on that, but we'll start with them.
Okay.
Um, it's corrupt. I mean, and where it especially irritates me is that we have other people. We talked about the senators before, for
Yeah.
instance. So it's very obvious that there are alignments with groups like Ripple, with certain factions within the government. The government officials will use people like them as quote unquote crypto experts who say that all the things that Bitcoin does can be done by these other people without using so much energy or without enabling criminals or whatever, and that just you know,
Yeah. So if you want, do we put that as the first question? Do I think Ripple is corrupt or
yeah, let's
incompetent?
let's play the game. Yeah,
Let's start it off. Let's kick it off. Ripple definitely corrupt. I have no doubt about it. And I'll just give one example. The level of pre-mine that they distributed to themselves is so outrageous. And the cash outs they've made during Ripple's existence have been so outrageous that I cannot tag them as anything other than corrupt.
yeah. Well, no, obviously, I don't disagree, and with that, let's switch to another very prominent character in the the crypto world, Vitalik Buterin.
Okay.
And now I do want to preface that when I say corrupt or incompetent, we don't necessarily have to say it about the person entirely.
Yeah.
It can be about a position they take or something like that. But Vitalik, and I'll spare bringing up some things on the computer right now. We'll just talk through these. Basically said after the merge, which occurred 2 or 3 days ago, the 15th, I believe it occurred, right? So he
Mario, how much time do we have?
Yeah, wrap up.
Okay. We're there. We're
okay.
So Vitalik said, "Hey, we just saved the world's 0.2% of the world's energy by making this switch." And so I'll give you a chance to.
Can I take door number 3?
You can do whatever you want with it.
Okay, I don't think it was. I don't think I've known of Vitalik because I don't know him personally, but I followed him and everything he's doing and everything. So I don't think he's corrupt by any stretch of the imagination. I think he has some very interesting ideas. A lot of things I might not agree with. I don't think he's necessarily incompetent in the strict sense of the word. But I do think his math is not right. I'll put it that way. I think he needs to check over his math because I don't think it scales like he thinks he does.
I would agree with you. I do not believe he is inherently corrupt. But I will add one other thing, and that's that I've come to the realization that even though Vitalik was involved in Bitcoin in the earliest days, it's obvious to me that he never understood the ethos of Bitcoin. And it really came to light to me recently when a quote from him came out that basically said it's essentially the thought of a madman to think that any person should be able to audit the entire blockchain. And
yeah, I think so. Here's where I fall with Vitalik, because and maybe it's not necessarily strict, really good to say his math. I would like to check. It's rather I would like to check his premises, because that's where I think the issue lies. Like we understand, I think he really thinks through stuff, but I think his premises are not the right premises, and that's kind of where I fall. So to your point
I
of
think
him
it would
saying,
be consistent with what I just said. Yeah.
To your point of saying he says I don't think one person should audit every single block of the blockchain. I think his premises, to me, sometimes, because not all of them, but some of them do not hold water, or I think I come at it from a different point of view.
Yeah.
And it's something I like to say, whenever you're not getting the result you're expecting, check your math first. But if your math checks out, check your premise.
Yeah.
Right. Because your math might be right, but if your premise is wrong,
yes,
well, you probably end up at a wrong place anyway. So
yes.
So go back. Go one step back.
Yes. Well, let's close with one last volley at this. So there's a trial going on right now. Hodl versus Craig Wright.
He who shall not be named. I do not want to give any more publicity to that individual that needs to get, but go ahead.
So I will just say at the beginning of the trial, Mr. Wright was sworn in,
Mm-hmm.
essentially using the American terms, slightly different terms were used for it, but
Mm-hmm.
to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll just ask, do you believe he was truthful in his testimony?
No, there's this. Okay, to me, he is a pathological liar, and he'll probably sue me at some point for saying this. We'll see how many lawsuits he can keep
You can
going
have an
on at
opinion.
one time.
We're all entitled to our opinion.
Yeah, but he sues people for opinions, right? Anyway, I think he's a pathological liar, and he uh, purposefully misleads. And to anybody that's in any capacity, authority capacity, I would say take him at his word. Declare publicly please declare publicly that he is Satoshi as he claims to be, and please collect and distribute the amount of taxes you feel are commensurate with that. So please, if as much as I've criticized some of the authority figures, I think this is a spot where you can absolutely take somebody at their word. You can absolutely take Craig Wright at his word of being Satoshi and the creator of Bitcoin, and please ask him to, disburse everything he needs to all parties involved.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because I can say that as a miner, I am taxed on my revenue. And so somewhere between 900,000 and 1.1 million Bitcoin
Yeah.
have apparently been mined by him. So
Yeah.
yeah, how about
Yeah,
yeah.
just please tax him. That's all I ask. Tax him. Uh, that's all I want. If anything comes out of this trial, is that he get taxed.
I love it. Well, Jose, we'll wrap up with that. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me. I'm sure the people listening learned a lot about you and about IBEX and Lightning, and I think some really insightful things just about life in general and business. And so thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Bob. I really enjoyed this, and I particularly enjoy the more long form conversations. Definitely, where you can like really dig into stuff and to get to the meat.
Yeah.
So it was a pleasure for me, and I thank you for coming down to Miami so we can have this face to face.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.